Today we are talking about UFOs in Denmark and reports, organizations, and insights from nearly 70 years of investigation. My wingman here, or actually the captain, is Toke. He's the vice chair and has been in SUFOI since 2000. Can you tell us a little more about what you are doing in our organization, Toke?
Yeah, I can do that. Well, I've been active in the organization since 1990, and I've been mainly working with report work, so investigation and studying the reports we have got throughout the years. And besides that type of activity, I'm also a researcher at Aalborg University in Denmark. So that's my kind of CV. So.
Okay, and then a short thing about me. My name is Benny Christian Grandahl. I started in SUFOI back in 1975 as an ordinary member. Then, by some obscure reason, I left ufology for nearly, it's now I have to say this bad number, 40 years, God damn it. It's out there. And came back in 2022 and has been working as a spokesperson for press releases and different radio shows and so on since then. And I'm also the coordinator of the video and photo reports that we get in from either through our homepage or through our Facebook group. Should we talk a bit about Denmark's, and I now hear Europe's oldest UFO organization? Can you say something about that, Toke?
Yeah, I can do that. So we were established back in 1957. So we are 3 years from the 70 years. Actually, it was organized or established by a Danish Air Force pilot. And in 1958, we started publishing the magazine called UFO News. Directly translated, it says UFO-nyt in Danish. And it went on till about 2010, and then we stopped publishing the magazine because of declining numbers of subscribers, but also because we prioritized our activities on our website, so on the internet. And we got the website from 1996, and that's kind of our main channel for communication to the public nowadays. And in 2009, we established also a page on Facebook, so that's another way of communicating to people. And then just a quick comment on the name, because we are called Scandinavian UFO Information, which is a bit misleading, because we have only basically been active in Denmark throughout all the years. Okay, we had a few representatives in Norway back in the 70s and 80s also, but the name arises from the fact that the organization started with some people living in the southern part of a peninsula called Jutland. So its original name was Southern Jutlandish UFO Information. So
investigation, actually.
No, yeah, that's right. And then later on, we became a national organization. So but the name was kind of out in the public, so people knew us by the name of SUFOI. And therefore, we had to find something to change the South Jutlandish name to something with S, and that became Scandinavian. So I don't know. It's like it's a bit of a strange story, but don't think so much about the Scandinavian. We are mainly active in Denmark.
Yeah, we have been mainly active in Denmark all the years, but I think H.C. Petersen that started us might had some plants there, perhaps.
Yeah.
Yeah. But well, the next thing we should talk about was, of course, the UFO reports. That's what you have been talking about in the two others sessions before. And we actually started taking them in 1957, even though H.C. Peterson saw them like something like small young children sitting at the roadside writing down the numbers on the number plates on the cars. But yeah, Toke, it's your
I can tell.
department.
So we start to give an overview of the historical development of our work with reports in Denmark. And of course, the first year's main focus, I mean, as Benny said, we started collecting reports from the very beginning, but in the beginning, the many first years, it was a bit rudimentary and not so well organized and systematic. But we did develop early on a simple questionnaire, which you can see the page of here, the front page. And we also built up some procedures around collecting reports and storing them and archiving and gradually also investigating reports. In the first years, we were very highly influenced by the extraterrestrial hypothesis and particularly by George Adamski's ideas. So you can see here the three types of crafts: motherships and cigar-shaped vehicles and so on. So that kind of so we had this kind of Adamski kind of thinking about UFOs, but in the mid-60s, something happened. There was a big discussion around the position of SUFOI on this matter, and then things gradually changed, and we went away from the Adamski interpretation of the phenomenon. But you can say from the beginning and at least until the mid-70s, we've subscribed wholeheartedly to the realist position, which means that we took the people's reports, accounts of what they saw as equal the thing they saw. We didn't question people's eyewitness reports or had any kind of interpretation of it. It was kind of real reports about real phenomena in the sky. So we had this kind of realism position. So that was the first years. Then in the mid-70s and onwards to the 2000s, we kind of what do you call it? We intensified the development of more professional kinds of works with report collecting and also investigation. So increasingly we became more professionalized, and we were highly inspired by kind of scientific methods, like methods of documentation and so on. And for instance, we in the late 70s and throughout the 80s and even up to the early 90s had a lot of several courses for investigators that was kind of weekend courses where people went through exercises and such as how to measure this the elevation of things and the compass, what do you call it, directions and so on. And also collecting reports without asking biased questions like was it red or was it blue, but more like which color did the phenomenon you saw had, and so on. And we also developed a more detailed questionnaire. And through this more systematic approach to the collecting and documentation and study of people's experiences, we also build up a lot of knowledge and expertise also on identification of sightings. Finally, especially in the late 70s, we also had some years where all reports were, in the good old days, I don't know the English word for it, but these cards, with holes in it. Anyway, we typed in all data from 4 years of reports, a lot of reports into a database, so it could be we could make statistical studies of it and so on. So these years kind of marked our change from being not kind of amateurs to become more professional in our work, and we also gradually shifted from what you can say, the realist extraterrestrial hypothesis position to a more cultural interpretation of UFOs, which I will come back to later also, what that means. In the previous slide, we also had Alan Hendry's book, the front page of the book, he made in the 70s, late 70s, and that was also very influential for our thinking in these years. So, yeah, then we can move to the more present times. So you can say in parallel with us being more scientific in a way, and also more kind of also leaving some kind of the ideas of the extraterrestrial hypothesis, we also became less, you might say, sexy in a way, and also got fewer and fewer people who subscribe to our magazine, and also fewer and fewer people who volunteer to work in our organization. So that was one of the reasons why we, around 2000, started to downscale our activities when it comes to collecting and studying reports. And also another reason was that, and that's something we will come back to later, and it will be interesting to discuss with you also. But this, with the change to the more cultural interpretation of the phenomenon, not so much focusing on the physicalness of the phenomenon, but more on the understandings of UFOs as a myth, also meant that we didn't see the same kind of value in continuing collecting reports and studying reports, because we more see it as a cultural product than as some kind of evidence for something. So so we today subscribe to this idea that UFOs are basically shared cultural understandings, of course combined with misperceptions, but therefore it's not so relevant to continue collecting sightings. And instead we have changed focus more to the information side, like the website, the public education, you can say, and also you can see here the front page of a brochure we made, which is called Then You See Shooting Star. The Walt Disney kind of, anyway. And that's a kind of a guide we made and distributed to libraries and so on in Denmark, which help people to identify what they see in the sky and give instructions on that. So that's kind of our main focus today. Yeah, and just to round this off, is this slide shows from 1976 to 2023. It shows the number of reports we have registered for each year, and you can see it goes up and down for several reasons. Sometimes the ups are due to mass observations of a single incident, like a very meteor, for instance, or bolide. I don't know how to pronounce in English anyway, but of course there's also other reasons due to this, but this pattern of, but in total we have collected around 18,000 reports since 1957. That goes from, handwritten small short notes on the back of an envelope, kind of reports on and up to, I would say, hundreds of pages of documentation for single incidents. So there's a large variety in the level of documentation, but in total it would be around 18,000. We don't know the exact number, but it would be around there. So yeah. Okay, so I continue. Yeah. And you can save your voice for later, Benny. So before talking more about what we do today, when it comes to the report work, just briefly, I will go through the conclusions we made after nearly 70 years of work in this field. In 2007, I wrote this book called 50 Years with UFOs, which is based on, I wrote it, but it's based on many people's work. So I also owe a lot of thanks to the many people who have worked throughout the decades with collecting and analyzing reports and so on. So, but I put together kind of the main conclusions and what we got from 50 years at that time in 2007 of work with this field. And what we conclude in this book is that UFOs are basically a cultural phenomenon. It's a cultural and mental framework for people's sense making of what they see in the sky, which means that people, of course, always have seen things in the sky. So it's not a new thing that people see rare apparitions of some kind in the sky. But the reason why we talk about UFOs or UAPs is that we have some kind of shared mental framework culturally, which comes into work. Then you see something in the sky, something you don't immediately identify as a plane, for instance, or a meteor or whatever. Then you can say that then a kind of mental framework is activated and then works as a way of interpreting the things you see, giving sense to it. It's a sense-making device, you can say, even if it's cognitive, of course, and also cultural. But and so the point here is that we have left totally the realist position and moved more into a kind of cultural interpretation of the phenomenon. And we would also say today that without the UFO myth, which is kind of anthropological cultural concept, we wouldn't have experiences of UFOs. We would have something else. People would still see things in the sky they couldn't identify, but it would be different and they would interpret it in different ways from today.
Yeah, it's also the same, like, we experience things and understand them by telling stories about what we
Yeah,
see. And if no one is telling us a story, we often create it ourselves based on what we see. You all know this about the lady that meets up at work with a black eye, and we as soon as we see her, we understand, oh, she was beaten by her husband, right? And that's somehow the same here.
It's a good example, and it is. Well, it just shows that we are human and we are always interpreting the kind of stimuli we receive from our environments, of course. So we are very much sense-making creatures, which is a very interesting thing about humans, of course. So anyway, and then of course also we conclude that that there's a multitude of natural phenomena and also social and cultural and psychological dynamics at play when people have experienced, such as misperceptions of distance, for instance, which I did a study back in the 90s of people's a statistical study of how people judged the distance to what they saw. And of course we know that if it's in nighttime, it's basically impossible to judge the distance, but still people have experiences of these distances, so they feel like they have a distance to as a distance. And what I also showed in that statistical study was also that interestingly, even if it focused only on IFOs, so things we had identified, but it's and then also UFOs, and that's maybe a detour now, but it showed that people's experience of distance indirectly also seems to have had an impact on our judgment of people's reports. Even if we knew that they couldn't measure the distance, somehow we would still more likely identify cases as UFOs if people experienced it as close to them, even if it was in nighttime. Anyway, but that was a detour. Back to the key conclusions here. So the final conclusion here is that it's epistemologically impossible to distinguish between UFO and IFO cases. And I will give you an example of that in a moment. But often we tend to spend a lot of time discussing is a UFO, is a IFO. But the problem is that we can't make that distinction in reality, of course. So that's kind of another key. And I will give an example of that on the next slide, which is a very illustrative case, which I also, by the way, investigated myself. But to make a long story short, the case is that back in May 1998, there was this case from Holte, which is north of Copenhagen. And Here, the main observer lives in a house in a single-family home neighborhood, and in the middle of the night, she wakes up by the noise from her television set, which had turned on by itself. So, of course, she was very confused by this thing that it had turned on. And she gets out of the bed, and simultaneously she sees a wave of light coming in through the window from outside, and she gets very scared by this. The television had turned on itself and the light from outside, and she runs through the house to the other end of the house because she has a friend visiting her and sleeping in the other end of the house. And while she's running through the living room, there comes another wave of light through windows, and she experiences it as a kind of an object circling around the house, and you know, the light of the object shines through windows every time it passes by a window. So she's very terrified, and I can vouch for that because we interviewed me and a colleague from SUFOI the day after, or a few days after, and so then she wakes up her friend who sleeps in the other end of the house, but that's all that happens that night, and the friend unfortunately didn't see anything. So the observation is this thing that apparently the television turned on, and also the alarm clock behaved like it had been turned off and turned on again. And she saw this light. So you can say it's a kind of, if in old days we would tend to think of this as a kind of visual observation with physical evidence, which would kind of put extra weight to the strangeness of the observation, that there also are some physical evidence collected to it. We, of course, as we always did at that time, did a very thorough investigation. So we contacted different entities, like, for instance, the railways in Denmark, because there is a railway close to the home. So we were interested if they had activities, construction work or something in the night, and so on and so on. We couldn't find a good explanation for this case. We could rule out a lot of things. But finally, we got a notice in the local newspaper, asked if someone else had seen something and could contact us if they had. And then we got this, we were contacted by a woman living on the other side of the road where the eyewitness lived. And she could tell us that exactly the same night she woke also in the middle of the night around 4 in the morning, because of the big, high, intensive light coming in through windows to her sleeping room. And she went up and looked out of the window and saw that her electrical wires from the pole in the street had fallen down and were short circuit on the grass, and created a lot of sparks, like a kind of, you know, a lot of sparks. And finally, the fuse in the pole, there's a fuse in the pole, burned over, of course, and it stopped. And also we contacted people in electrical engineering to ask about, so the light could obviously come from there. And also we talked with an electrical engineer I know, who could tell that the voltage fluctuations caused by that type of massive short circuit in a local grid creates also can affect standby relays, so they turn on like the television. So what we had was a possible close encounter of second kind, if we use the Heineck definition of this. And it turned out to be in some electrical wires which had fallen down. And the thing is that if we hadn't got that contact from this woman who lived next door, in a way, because you were on holiday during that week, we had the notice in the local newspaper, or she didn't dare to do anything about it, then we would never, as in never, had the explanation of this case, because we wouldn't, even if we are very, have a lot of fantasy, we wouldn't have thought about this as a possible explanation for this case, I can assure you. And we have several of these cases, which shows that even if you have cases with high strangeness, where you could argue this is a UFO case, well, epistemologically, it's impossible to say. We can only say positively that we can identify things, but we can never say the opposite. So these kind of cases have been very instructive for our way of looking at the phenomenon today. And I know, and this is also why I'm looking forward to discussion afterwards, because we might, I sense that there can be different takes on this, but that has been very influential, this kind of experiences for our position at least. So that was what I had to this. Yeah.
Yeah. On my part of the road, so to speak, over in the photo and video department, we also often have some cases with very high strangeness. Last year in February, for instance, we had a mother and her nearly grown-up daughter that was driving home one late afternoon. And they were both looking at the evening sky and find it very, very strange. So they decided that the daughter should take the mother's smartphone and take a picture of the evening sky or late afternoon sky while they were driving. And while they were driving in the neighborhood on their way home, and she took the picture at the same time she was starting to take the picture, some kind of light was flying across the sky. And you can see here is the picture. It came from, I have to turn on my UFO. It came from here and then fly this way. And here we see it in the sky. And the mother, she contacted us at SUFOI in our Facebook group, and also at the same time she contacted the local press, and they wrote about this the next day in the local newspaper and on the local website, and suddenly a lot of observations came in from people all around this little town in Jutland. And yeah, the strange thing was when we were looking at these observations, which were without pictures, they were all from later in the evening, and some of them even turned out to be on different days, either the day before or the day after. But there was a lot of people that seen some strange thing in the sky. What we understood and what we could see when we investigated this was that there was a full moon that evening. So we asked the lady who sent in the observation where if she had seen the moon that evening. Yeah. The moon was just behind my car, she said. But as she turned here, just at the same time, you can see the curve here. At the same time as the daughter took the picture, the moon was reflected in the front windshield. So as she turned the UFO or the moon, the reflection of the moon was moving across the windshield, and that gave that observation. And another very very strange thing happened a few weeks later, where Venus and Jupiter were close in visual conjunction in the evening sky. And they were standing very close, as you can see here. This is taken from my home. It was standing here. And the strange thing is, you do it perhaps yourself. When you see two lights, bright lights in the sky, in some way your brain is telling you there is something between them. There's an object there sitting on something. And in this case, it would be the world's largest UFO, because it would be 670 million kilometers wide, because that was the distance between the planet at the time of the conjunction. And you know, Danes always jokes about the Swedish people. So I of course have to tell you that in Sweden it went totally berserk because people saw those two close light in the evening, and it was just a year after the Ukraine war, and there has been some strange incidents with drones flying around Swedish atomic plants, and yeah, you know, UFOs and nukes, right? But they were reporting to the police that they saw drones in the evening sky. They saw spy balloons. They saw every kind of thing. I think during that week, more than 200 people in Sweden called the local police station and and told them about this strange object in the sky. But it was just the two planets. And also here in Denmark, we had a lot meaning 5 to 10. And it's not because we are more clever than Swedes. It's not at least that. But we had 5 to 10 photos sent in and even videos. We had a lady who was driving around her town to take videos of this object from different directions for nearly 2 hours. But yeah, it was just two planets, and you can guess it's hard to tell a woman who has spent 2 hours driving around town and taking videos of this object that, yeah, sorry, but it was just two planets, right? But let's move forward to how we work today. As you can understand, our role primarily is that we help people understand what they see in the sky. And in practice, the work is shared between Toke and me, meaning I have a team of experts behind me that knows a lot about drones and photos and videos and reflections and stuff. But Toke is doing it all by himself. So let's start talking about the visual sightings, Toke.
Well, I think you are doing a really good job with photo side. But anyway, yeah. So anyway, the visual sightings, they are mainly today reported via our website. We have what you can call it, a questionnaire formula. I'm not sure about the English word for it, but you can go and type in your information and submit it. And then we get an email with that information. And then first of all, of course, the incident is registered on our list of reports, which is also on the website. Just with the basic information like date and hour and so on. Then I do, that's the thing I do, but I do a simple screening for the most typical explanations and don't overestimate it in a way what I do. It's more like saying, okay, I look into, could it be stars, for instance, planets at the time, fireballs, and so on, or planes. That's very basic things, as you all know how it works. And we have, I guess, some of the same kind of key points to visit to check for these things like flightradar24.com and so on. And of course, I also use the experience from many years of investigation and from all we have collected throughout the years of experience to interpret people's experiences. But well, it's not like in the good old days where we'd have a network of local what do you call it, local investigators who would move out and talk with people and so on. It's basically me sitting in front of my computer. So if I get to a kind of identification, a reasonable identification, I give of course an answer to the observer. If not, well, then they get more traditional standard answer. And well, reports are saved digitally. So that's basically what is done. So I think it's much more interesting to hear about you, Benny, because it's much more thorough.
Yeah. Yeah, but before we move on to that, perhaps we should talk a bit about how many percent of the reports that are identified and how many of them that are not.
Yeah. You can say in the good old days, we had something like 95% I'd say would be identifiable, in the meaning that we would have about 60% of the reports which we were very, what do you call it, certain about an explanation. And we would then have something like 35%, which we would say, we're not entirely certain, but it resembles previous observations of fireballs and other things. We cannot say exactly it was, but it looks very similar to these previous reports we got. So therefore, I think they're identifiable, or the data was very poor, for instance. And then we would have
then that's a 5%, right?
We couldn't identify, you can say, and where we had enough data, or a reasonable amount of data, and couldn't identify it. But as I said, we're not so keen on this clear distinction between UFO and IFO. So it's more saying, okay, so we would have something like 5% where we would estimate we had collected enough material to make some kind of reasonable judgment of the case, but couldn't find a plausible explanation. So yeah.
No. So often the last 5% that was due to missing data of details and stuff like that. Most of the time, right?
Yeah. Well, I would say it would be cases where we have a reasonable amount of data. But of course, nowadays our identification percentage is much lower, as it's basically me who sits, and also Benny and colleagues on the photo side. So of course it's much lower, because there's a difference between being one person and being an entire group of people.
Yeah. So. Well, should we take a look at the photos and videos? We do basically the same. Why did it came, all of it? God, here we are. We use a kind of procedure that is similar to Occam's razor. We start by looking at the usual suspects. It's mostly, lens flares and reflections. That's the first thing we are looking at. Is it a photo taken through a window or a windshield or something like that? Then we look for diagonals and other ways of detecting if it's a lens flare or reflection. Last summer we had a very strange object that was landed near a person's summer house, cottage, and it looks very, very strange. It looked like something from Star Wars, perhaps. But when we looked at it, we found out that it was simply a new iPhone 14, I think, at that point, that have 3 camera lenses on the iPhone, and it was reflected in the window that the observer was taking the photo through. So it was not Star Wars that came to us. It was just an ordinary iPhone. Then next we of course check for planes. We use Flight Radar 24 and some other sources when it needed. We can go back in time. And the next thing we look at is satellites and meteors. And there we use different sat trackers and of course this website called fireballs.emo.net, where they collect all reports about fireballs in the sky and other kind of meteors that's lighting up. And then we go for the astronomical objects with heavens above and other planetarian apps to see if it's, Sirius or like the Jupiter and Venus conjunction that I talked about before. And then finally, we look for meteorological, not objects as such, but what shall we call instances. It could be a strange cloud. I had once taken a picture with a very strange saucer-like object that was hiding in the skies over the fields of my property here in the south of Zealand in Denmark. But it was some wind phenomenon that created this saucer-like thing. I can't recall the name of it. If I had Ole Henningsen by my side, he would have told me instantly, of course. So most of the photo reports, they are documented very detailed. Here we see a photo report from 2022, where a woman in Narsarsuaq in Greenland sent in 3 videos. We see a still picture here of the video, one of the videos. And often Ole use Google Maps and Google Street View to get pictures about from the site. So he actually travels there virtually. And also we try to look at maps of the area and stuff like that. And then we have also here from, I think it's Heaven Above, or Stellarium it is, where we see if it could be different kind of astronomical objects, and we document it all in the photo reports. Especially Narsarsuaq is very interesting at the moment, because there's been a lot of reports from that area about lights in the sky and stuff like that. But most of them are not possible to investigate thoroughly, because either we don't get enough data, because in Greenland we don't have roads and street names and house numbers everywhere. So if you are standing out in the wild, you don't take up your phone and start your GPS when you see something strange. Perhaps you take a picture of it. So often these details are left out, and so it's very hard to track. And also in Greenland, there are no requirement that planes are turning on their transponders, and there are only radar systems in 2 places: the American Space Force base in Thule, and at the largest airport, Sønderstrømfjord, in south of Greenland. So it's hard to get data and details enough. But that was a detour, sorry. So that's how we are doing with the photo and video reports here. So here we actually do some more documentation than very often, because it's been a tradition started by Ole Henningsen, which you all of course know, the Danish ufologist, grand old man, so to speak. Has been with SUFOI since 1959, 2 years after they started. And another thing that Ole has been doing is the Danish X-Files, because we also have a military, and you think it's insane, but we actually have a military here in Denmark, and they had different investigation goings on, and for years they have been collecting UFO reports. But in 2009, they turned all these reports. They scanned them in from a binder they had standing on a shelf somewhere, and put them on their website, and they gave us these files for investigation. And Ole here's actually getting the binder, and he has been going through a lot of these. By the way, there's only one picture in that binder, and is this strange-looking jellyfish here. If you recall, there's been a lot of talk about jellyfish videos from the US military, but this is actually just a steam cloud from the local power plant nearby here, taken in 1974 in a town in Jutland. Ole also found out that there's a lot of stuff in the National Archives that have been released for public reading. So for years he's been traveling to the Danish National Archive and been looking through all the different papers that both military and intelligence has been collecting about UFOs since sometimes in the early 50s and up until sometimes in the 80s, as I understand it. Because in the early years, during the 1950s and the 1960s, Danish intelligence, military, and air force was following the development of the Danish UFO scenes with some interest, it looks like. They even had some report scheme that they were sharing with us. And they were also trying to cooperate with the UFO organizations about collecting reports at some point. But during the 1970s, these official instances, they somehow lost their interest. But Ole's investigation has been leading to a series of books, where the first one came, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, with different X-files, different released documents from the early days in the 1950s and the 1960s. And then, of course, in Denmark, we have especially one famous case, UFO case. And it's actually from August 13th, 1970, where a police officer called Evald Morup Hansen is driving his police car home at 10:50 p.m. in the evening, and suddenly a beam of light is coming from the sky and projected down over the car, and the car stops, and the police radio is going dead, and he feels the cabin in the car is getting warm. Then Morup is leaning forward and looking up through the windshield, and he sees this huge silvery gray object, which he determined to be between 10 and 15 meters wide. And it had 2 ball-shaped protrusions on the bottom of the saucer, and each was between 1 and 1.5 meters in diameter. He also estimated that the UFO was hovering at an altitude of 20 to 25 meters or something like that. And this beam of light, it had a very strange cutoff when the beam was taken back into the UFO. It looks like there was some ice cone hanging there in the midair, and then it disappeared up in the UFO. And when the lights disappeared and the UFO was moving on, his car started again. But he also, in the front of his windshield, he had a steady mount camera sitting. And during the observation, here we see the guy, Morup. He actually became a kind of a celebrity here in Denmark because of this observation. And here we see the road in front of him after the observation, where the lights has come back to the car and so on. This is 2 road signs at the end of the road. It's not the UFO. The UFO, the pictures he took, that is, they show just this light in the sky he was seeing, and as I said, the camera was steady mounted. He couldn't turn it upward or anywhere else. It was just directed forward. So it says something about that this object has been close to Earth, that he could only see this light in the sky. And of course, SUFOI was investigating this. We had reporters, investigators at his place the next day and talking to him. As I said, he became a celebrity because his observation was, they even talked about it in the radio and the news the next day, because it was not every day that a police officer in Denmark told the public that he has been seeing a UFO. So actually 3 years and 1 day later, on August 14th, 1973, at nearly the exact same time, he had a new encounter. But this time the car didn't stop and the object was not that close to the car. It was flying over a field. Again in 1976, he had one more encounter. This time he had a fellow police officer with him in the car, and they were driving along a road, and when they saw some light hanging over a forest that looked like the full moon cut in half. So that was the only time he had. Oh yeah, sorry, I forgot to show you our investigators. They are the two guys here. But so only the last time he had a witness with him. Yeah, if we look at the Danish UFO scene today, we have, I will not say we have UFO organizations in the same manner as you have in other European countries. We have some UFO groupings. There's, of course, is SUFOI. My grandson says it sounds like a name of an old Japanese guy, SUFOI. Then we have UFO Denmark. They are the only two organizations that have members as such, and is present outside of Facebook. I know that I've taken the Facebook covers of the two organizations. SUFOI is, as we said, nearly 70 years, and I think UFO Denmark, they started as a exopolitical organization, activist organizations, around 2010 or 11, and then in 2018 they became a more normal UFO organization, but I don't think they have that many members actually. The largest gathering of UFO interested, they are found in a UFO group called Danish UFO group on Facebook, and that's the only place they are present. The strange thing is that both skeptics like we and believers, they are together here in this group, and without it's getting too noisy or there are too loud discussions. And then finally, yeah, perhaps this is the largest grouping of UFO interested. We have this podcast called Flying Saucer, in Danish, Flyvende Tallerken, said with a little Zealand dialect. And it's hosted by a guy called Frederik Dix Gottlieb, who has also been writing a couple, have been publishing a couple of books, and have a novel about UFOs with a UFO-related topic on the way. And I think each new week, each episode is downloaded from 20 to 25 to 50,000 times. And the strange thing is, because that what I've been investigating in, most of the people that listens to this podcast has never seen a UFO themselves, whereas most of the people who are active in the two Danish UFO group organizations, they often have a UFO encounter at some kind that started their journey. But this is mainly the four groupings that are there. and of course from there are a lot of people that mingle around here. For instance, I am both in Scandinavian UFOs of Information's Facebook group and in UFO Denmark and Dansk UFO group, Dansk UFO group, and listen to Flying Saucer. But where are the military and the intelligence today? Yeah, actually, we don't know of any current investigations. And we have some, but we know some reliable sources within the military, and that has assured us that that is not the case. Actually, they point all people, all public people that contact the military about UFOs, they are sent in our direction. Actually, in the same way, in the government. Eduardo was asking me, have you ever had any talk about UFOs or UAPs in the government? I think you had to use that for the EU meeting the other day, right? And we only could find one case where a member of the parliament was asking the defense minister about what the military and the intelligence and the government and such was doing about UFO, and how if they saw UFOs as a threat to the Danish security. And the defense minister at that time answered that they saw no reason to investigate in UFOs, and as there were no threat registered in their opinion. And again, they mentioned that every citizen that contact the military, they are sent to SUFOI. There was one thing more. Last year, there were a citizen initiative that proposed a Schumer-like law that should demand that all military or intelligence or government information about UFOs should be released to the public, and that all information about extraterrestrials on Earth, I think they mean here in Denmark, because I don't think we have that much influence on other countries. They should also be released. And to vote this into a bill that could be voted about in our government, there had to be 50,000 people that signs on this as a good idea. And you have, I think it's half a year or 8 months, perhaps 6 or 8 months, to collect that many interested. And they only got 73. So it never went into parliament or government for anything.